There's a moment in every connection, romantic, social, or professional, where something inside you just clicks. At first, you're the one reaching out. You respond quickly. You explain yourself. You try to prove you're enough, hoping your consistency will somehow convince someone to see your value. You do everything you're told connection requires: openness, effort, vulnerability. But then, the silence stretches. The one-word replies arrive. Your presence is taken for granted, and without even realizing it, you start to feel smaller in the very space where you were trying to be seen. That's when the shift begins, not in them, but in you. You stop reaching, you stop chasing, you stop handing out pieces of your soul in exchange for temporary attention. And in that stillness, something powerful awakens. Not spite, not revenge, but clarity. The kind of clarity the Stoics spoke of, when you realize your peace doesn't live in someone else's recognition. It lives in your ability to let go with grace. If you're someone who's learning to value inner stillness more than external noise, consider subscribing as a commitment to yourself, to walk the path of strength, clarity, and self-mastery. There is a kind of silence that doesn't scream for attention, yet somehow it becomes the loudest thing in the room. It doesn't demand, it doesn't beg, it doesn't try to convince anyone of its importance. It simply exists. And in that stillness, it forces others to feel what your presence used to mask, their own emptiness. This is the power of stillness. Not passive, not bitter, just intentional. There's no rage in it, no performance, only withdrawal, quiet, calm, final. And when that happens, the dynamic shifts. The one who once ignored your words is now haunted by your silence. Think about the last time someone disappeared from your life without drama. No final speech, no closure, just a gradual fading. You didn't realize how much space they occupied until they were gone. And suddenly, your mind went to work. Was it something I said? Did I miss something? The silence becomes a mirror, and the reflection it reveals is never comfortable. This is how the mind responds to stillness. It panics, because stillness leaves room for thought, and thought, when mixed with regret, becomes a storm. When someone is always talking, always explaining, always present, they can be taken for granted. But when they go still, that's when people finally listen, not because you raised your voice, but because you removed it. Stoic philosophy speaks to this truth often, reminding us that stillness is not inaction, but disciplined restraint. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Stillness is the space where clarity lives. It's where you step back and say, "I will no longer participate in this dynamic that asks me to give while receiving nothing in return." Not to punish, but to preserve. You are not retreating in defeat. You are withdrawing in wisdom, and wisdom doesn't need to be loud. Most people are addicted to noise, digital noise, emotional noise, relational noise, but noise is not connection, it's clutter. And when you go still, you expose that contrast. Your absence doesn't just remove you, it highlights the imbalance, and those who benefited from your overgiving are now left in the silence they never thought they'd have to sit with. Epictetus said, "If someone does not want to be with me, I want to be with them even less." That's not cruelty, that's self-respect. That's the quiet decision to stop chasing people who only respond when they fear losing you. There's a strange discomfort people feel when they no longer have access to you. They try to poke at your silence, test it, disrupt it. Not because they miss you, but because they miss the power they had when you were still moving toward them. But when you stop, truly stop, not coldly but consciously, everything changes. You no longer speak from a place of need, you speak from a place of presence. Or you don't speak at all, and your silence becomes the first real conversation they've ever had with themselves. Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living." Stillness is not isolation, it is healing. It is where the emotional energy you once spent trying to be seen now begins to return home. You're no longer out there chasing understanding. You're here, inside, gathering your power. And power doesn't announce itself. It just sits, waits, observes. Stillness is how you reclaim control, not over them, but over you. This isn't about being mysterious. It's about being grounded. You are no longer available for performances. You are no longer reacting to every impulse, every delay, every silence on their end. You've learned that not every question deserves an answer, not every message needs a reply, and not every absence requires you to fill the gap. That is maturity, that is self-possession, and the ones who once counted on your emotional availability now face the space they helped create. It's here, in this stillness, that your value begins to rise, not because you became more, but because you stopped giving so freely. You allowed the other person to sit in their own energy without your emotional labor to sustain them, and they start to realize the connection wasn't as one-sided as they thought. You weren't the one chasing, you were the one showing up. The weight they feel now is the weight you carried silently, and that silence, it speaks volumes. Seneca reminds us, the greatest remedy for anger is delay. Stillness is not just about removing yourself, it's about refusing to react. You begin to understand that your greatest influence comes not from assertion, but from restraint. You are not easily provoked. You are not rushing to clarify. You are not fighting to be chosen. You are choosing yourself. And in a world that thrives on instant reactions and emotional overexposure, your composure becomes magnetic. Let others wonder. Let them replay the moments. Let them feel the absence of what they took for granted. Because true stillness doesn't just pull you back. It pulls them in, not through manipulation, but through contrast. You show them, without saying a word, what life feels like without you. And for the first time, they have to confront what they were never willing to see before. Stillness is not the end of connection. It's the beginning of discernment. It's where you stop trying to be heard and start listening to yourself. You are not punishing them with silence. You are protecting your peace. And anyone who mistakes that for distance never truly valued your nearness. Now you stand still, not cold, but clear, not angry, but aware, and that awareness becomes your edge. Because nothing shakes a person more than the realization that they lost access to you. And it wasn't because you disappeared. It was because you finally returned to yourself. Attachment is a quiet thing. It rarely announces itself. It doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't need acknowledgement to grow. It simply builds itself in the background, woven into the rhythms of your replies, your laughter at their half-formed jokes, your reminders, your patience, your presence. And because it's so constant, so unshakably consistent, it begins to feel like a given, like something that will always be there until it's not. And that's when the silence hits differently, not as peace, but as absence. The truth is, most people don't realize how tethered they are to your presence until it disappears. They don't notice the weight you were carrying for them until you set it down. Your loyalty became invisible, your emotional labor unspoken, and yet they depended on it deeply. That's the irony of human nature. The things we depend on most, we often value the least, until they're no longer ours. What once felt ordinary becomes rare, and the one they barely noticed starts to echo in everything. You were always there, checking in, showing up, filling in the emotional blanks they never asked about, but always expected you to understand. And they got used to it. Your consistency became background noise. Your generosity was filtered through the lens of expectation. You made them feel seen, but they stopped seeing you. And then you stopped. Not out of anger, not to make a point. You just stopped because something inside you went quiet and realized this isn't being returned. And that's when everything changes. They don't immediately feel the loss. At first, it's just a faint shift in the air, a missed message, a longer pause, less warmth in your tone. But slowly that absence begins to bloom into awareness. They start to look for what they never had to search for before. They open your chat and scroll through memories, wondering if they missed the signs. Not because they miss you, but because they miss the version of themselves they were when you cared. As Epictetus once said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." When you were available, they held opinions. They believed they could reach you whenever they needed, that your kindness had no boundaries, that your presence was unconditional. But when you step back, those opinions collapse. And what takes their place isn't understanding, it's doubt. Questions form, and the human mind doesn't handle open loops well. It starts to obsess, to reflect, to reconstruct timelines in search of what went wrong. People often confuse reflection with missing you. They don't realize that what they truly crave isn't you. It's how effortless it felt to be wanted by you. That version of connection where they never had to reach because you were already there. That ease, that emotional safety, that invisible thread that held everything together without them ever noticing the knots you were constantly tying just to keep it from unraveling. That's what they long for, not because they've changed, but because your absence now forces them to feel everything you protected them from. But by then, your energy has shifted. You no longer seek to be understood. You've stopped replaying the effort. You've stopped measuring your worth by someone else's recognition. You understand now that true connection doesn't require you to disappear in order to be seen. And as you detach, something powerful begins to happen, not to them, but to you. You begin to notice all the ways you gave more than you received. You remember the days you confused being needed with being valued, and you forgive yourself for not noticing sooner. When you stop offering access, people begin to remember how rare it was to have it. They remember how your presence made them feel secure, how your voice calmed their chaos, how your belief in them made them believe in themselves. And now that it's gone, they start searching, not just for you, but for that feeling. But here's the truth. They won't find it in someone else because it wasn't about the attention. It was about the intention. And your intention was never casual. They may come back, yes, they often do, not because they suddenly see your worth, but because they now feel the emptiness you once filled. But what they'll find is a version of you that no longer fits the role they remember, not colder, just clearer, not angry, just unavailable. And that clarity will feel like distance, but it's not distance, it's healing. It's you no longer shrinking to be digestible. Attachment, once broken, doesn't return the same. It either deepens through mutual growth or dissolves into a memory. And the ones who come back hoping for the past are often met with a silence that says, "That version of me no longer lives here." Because once you've detached from needing to be seen, you no longer accept being overlooked. Chasing always feels noble at first. You tell yourself it's about care, about effort, about showing that you're willing to fight for what matters. But quietly, underneath the surface, something else is happening. Every time you overextend, you're whispering a message you may not even realize you're sending. I need something from you that I can't seem to find in myself. It's subtle, it's unspoken, but it reshapes the entire dynamic. And in that space, the one you're chasing doesn't see devotion, they see leverage. What should have been mutual becomes unequal. Not because they're better, but because you lowered yourself in the process of proving your worth. That's the sting. Not that they didn't see you, but that you had to try so hard to be seen, that you watered down your self-respect just to keep their interest. And the deeper you go into that pattern, the more you start erasing the very value you were trying to showcase. You respond quickly to things that barely deserve your time. You justify behaviors that disrespect your presence. You keep showing up in spaces that don't reciprocate. And little by little, they stop being grateful, not because you're unworthy, but because you've become predictable. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, but it's precisely that refusal to fully accept ourselves that often leads us into this trap of chasing. We hope someone else's attention will confirm our value. We hope that by doing more, we'll finally be chosen in a way that validates the parts of us we secretly doubt. But the more you try to earn what should be freely given, the more invisible you become, not because you don't matter, but because they learn to expect everything and give nothing in return. And the paradox is cruel. The more effort you put in, the more the frame shifts against you. You teach them, without meaning to, that your time is always available, that your boundaries are soft, that your energy has no cost. And in doing so, you unintentionally devalue yourself, not in their eyes, but in your own. The imbalance becomes internal before it becomes relational. You feel the drain. You sense the resentment building. You keep hoping it'll get better if you just give a little more. But it doesn't, because what you chase, you place above you. And what you place above you has the power to crush you. The Stoics understood this dynamic deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. Your suffering doesn't come from their lack of effort. It comes from your decision to keep chasing in spite of it, to keep hoping where hope has become self-abandonment, to keep proving yourself to someone who's already made their comfort more important than your clarity. And the moment you stop, something miraculous happens. The imbalance collapses, because it was never about them being above you. It was about you placing yourself below. The second you stop overreaching, the illusion shatters. They're not elevated anymore. They're just exposed. Exposed for how little they were giving, for how much they were receiving, for how long they coasted on your consistency while offering you the bare minimum. And now, without your effort to prop them up, they're left standing on their own. And it's quieter and emptier and far less impressive than they once appeared. You begin to see how chasing masked the truth, that you were carrying the connection, that you were doing the emotional heavy lifting, that your presence was the glue, and without it, the whole thing starts to unravel. But instead of feeling regret, you start to feel relief. Because detaching doesn't just remove you from their world, it returns you to your own. You're no longer waiting on their recognition to feel seen. You're no longer desperate for their response to feel heard. You're no longer shrinking yourself just to keep a conversation going that you didn't even start. Seneca once wrote, "No person has the power to have everything they want, but it is in their power not to want what they don't have." You don't need to be chosen by someone who only values you when you're pursuing them. You don't need to wait for validation that arrives too late. What you need is to recognize that anything built on imbalance cannot sustain itself. That respect, when begged for, turns into pity, and no one wants to be pitied. When you finally stop chasing, you begin to see what was never real. The conversations that only happened when you initiated, the connection that only existed when you held it together, the relationship that was only alive because you kept breathing life into it. And with each step back, clarity returns. You realize that your worth was never missing. It was just hidden beneath the weight of your own overgiving. You thought you were being strong, loyal, committed, but what you were being was drained. And now you're done. Not bitter, not broken, just done. Because peace doesn't live in proving, it lives in presence, and you've come home to yours. So when they finally notice your absence, when they try to reach back, to reclaim the attention you used to give so freely, they'll find someone new. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally stopped being less of yourself for the sake of being more to them. And that quiet shift, that's the real power. Silence isn't weakness, it's not avoidance, it's not the lack of something, it's the presence of something deeper, something stronger, something most people are too noisy to recognize. It isn't about turning your back on someone to prove a point. It's about turning inward to remember your own. Silence is not what happens when you run out of words. It's what happens when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to people who were only listening to respond, not to understand. In a world that celebrates constant engagement, silence becomes radical. It's not passive, it's precise. It's not a retreat, it's a redefinition of space. When you stop speaking, stop justifying, stop over-explaining your soul to someone who's not even paying attention, that silence becomes louder than anything you ever said. It doesn't need punctuation, it doesn't need a caption, it just sits there, calmly, exposing every crack in the connection that your words used to cover up. And here's the thing, that kind of silence doesn't just leave people with absence, it leaves them with themselves. That's the part they're not ready for. Your silence becomes a mirror, and when there's no more noise to distract them, they start to hear things they've been avoiding. They replay your last message. They dissect your tone. They read into pauses that were never there before. They fill in the blanks with their own guilt, their own fear, their own regret. And they become haunted, not by what you said, but by what you didn't. This is where the obsession starts. Not when you spoke up, but when you stopped. Because as long as you were explaining, they could stay comfortable. But now that you're silent, they have to ask the questions you used to answer for them. And that's what most people are really afraid of, being left alone with the truth. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And your silence removes all their distractions. It forces them to hear what was always there, but buried under the sound of your constant effort. Your effort to fix, to clarify, to soften the discomfort of their indifference. But now, there's just space. And in that space, the weight of their neglect becomes undeniable. You're not going silent to punish. That's not strength, that's pride. This isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. You're not retreating because you're angry. You're pausing because you finally realized that not everything deserves your energy. Not every conversation is sacred. Not every connection is worthy of being salvaged. And the most powerful boundaries are often the quietest ones. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And isn't that the most painful part? Looking back and realizing how much of your life was spent trying to be heard by someone who had no intention of listening. You explained yourself over and over, hoping that maybe this time they'd finally get it. But they didn't, not because you weren't clear, but because they weren't capable. And now your silence becomes the first thing they ever truly hear from you. It's strange how something so quiet can make such noise in someone else's mind, but that's the nature of silence. It amplifies everything that was hidden, and once it starts echoing, it becomes hard to ignore. The silence you leave behind is not empty, it's charged. It holds every time you were dismissed, every time you were overlooked, every time your kindness was mistaken for weakness. It holds the unspoken truth. You had access. You misused it. Now it's gone. You don't have to make a grand exit. You don't have to announce your withdrawal. That's performance. That's noise. Real silence is clean, calm, final. It doesn't argue. It doesn't defend. It just stops. And that's what makes it so hard to fight against, because there's nothing left to push against, nothing left to blame. Just the undeniable weight of their own behavior reflected back at them through the stillness you left in your wake. And slowly, they begin to feel it, not all at once, but in waves, in moments where they reach for you and realize you're no longer reaching back, in memories that once brought them comfort and now sting with loss, in the realization that your absence feels heavier than your presence ever did. That's the paradox of silence. It's not lighter, it's louder. Not softer, but sharper. Not distant, but intimate in the way only reflection can be. Epictetus said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But most people speak endlessly just to avoid hearing anything at all. Your silence is an invitation, not to return, not to reconcile, but to reflect. And whether or not they take it is no longer your concern, because the moment you chose stillness over struggle, you reclaimed something far more valuable than their attention. You reclaimed your peace. You're not proving anything anymore. You're not fighting to be seen. You're not trying to convince anyone of your worth. You're just still, and that stillness becomes your strength. Because real power doesn't scream. It doesn't need to. It just exists, calm, composed, unmoved. And when the world around you finally quiets down, it's that stillness that remains. So if they come back, they'll find a different version of you. Not bitter, not guarded, just no longer available to be misunderstood. Because once silence has done its work, there's nothing left to say. Every relationship, every conversation, every glance across a room, it all takes place within an invisible frame. Not one you can see or touch, but one you can feel. It's the subtle tension between who holds the need and who offers the value. And what most people don't realize is that this frame determines everything. The balance of attention, the flow of power, the direction of effort. You've felt it before, even if you couldn't name it. That feeling of chasing someone else's time, their validation, their energy. The quiet frustration of always initiating, always explaining, always waiting. That's what it feels like to live inside someone else's frame. And the longer you stay there, the more you forget you ever had your own. When you chase, even with the best of intentions, you enter a dynamic that places your worth in someone else's hands. Not because they're better than you, not because they asked for it, but because that's what chasing does. It bends you. It asks you to prove, to please, to perform. It puts you on edge, makes you guess, leaves you second-guessing your words, your timing, your presence. You become the one waiting for a reply, waiting to be chosen. And without even knowing it, you've made their approval your anchor. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But you can't do that when your identity is built inside someone else's frame. You can't know who you truly are if your worth keeps rising and falling with someone else's attention. That's why detachment isn't about walking away, it's about walking back into your own mind. When you stop chasing, you're not rejecting them, you're simply returning to yourself. And in doing so, the frame begins to shift. Detachment doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be cruel. It doesn't require any declaration. It only requires composure, a quiet recognition that you no longer need to convince anyone of anything. You're not asking to be understood anymore. You're not explaining why you deserve respect. You're not defending your intentions to people who twisted them for their own comfort. You're simply done handing over your energy like it was free. And that's where the power hides. Not in confrontation, but in calm. Not in shouting, but in silence. Because the frame doesn't shift when you demand it. It shifts when you stop giving people the access they never earned. When you stop chasing, they begin to feel the stillness where your effort used to live. And suddenly, they're the ones wondering. They're the ones reaching. They're the ones calculating their words, unsure of your response. Not because you've become someone else, but because you've stopped making them the center of your self-worth. This reversal happens not with revenge, but with refinement. When you stop trying to prove you're good enough, you become the standard. When you stop trying to fix a one-sided bond, you start attracting people who meet you in the middle. Because you're no longer performing, you're choosing. You're not standing at the edge of their world, hoping to be invited in. You're grounded in your own. And that subtle shift is more powerful than any speech you could give. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's what the frame is. It's the space where you reclaim control. You're not trying to win someone over. You're not fighting for a seat at a table that requires you to shrink. You're realizing that your peace was never meant to be negotiated. And once you sit in that realization, your energy changes. You no longer lean forward in desperation. You lean back in discernment. What people often forget is that influence doesn't come from being the loudest voice in the room. It comes from being the one who doesn't flinch when silence stretches. The one who doesn't rush to fill the awkward pauses. The one who isn't afraid of being misunderstood. Because when you know your own value, you no longer beg for recognition. You embody it. That presence speaks louder than any words ever could. And eventually, the people who once held power over your emotions start to feel that shift. They notice your absence, not just physically, but energetically. They realize they can no longer count on your availability. They can't predict your response. They can't rely on your forgiveness like they used to. And that uncertainty creates gravity. Not because you manipulated them, but because you removed yourself from a dynamic that was never sustainable to begin with. This is why the frame is so important. Because every time you enter someone else's frame, you risk losing yourself. You risk becoming the version of you that bends instead of stands, that over-explains instead of observes, that pleads instead of chooses. But when you create your own frame, built on clarity, calm and boundaries, you no longer need anyone to validate it. They either step in with respect or they stay outside. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." And there is a kind of bravery in refusing to chase, in sitting still while others expect you to move. It's not about being indifferent. It's about being selective. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to fight for the attention of someone who only sees you when you're loud. You simply return to your center and let the silence speak for itself. Because once the frame shifts, everything else follows. You're no longer trying to fit into their world, you're inviting them into yours. And that invitation is no longer free. It's earned, not by begging, not by proving, but by showing up with the same clarity and composure you had when you stopped explaining. And from that place, you don't chase, you attract. Detachment is often misunderstood. People assume it's cold, like shutting a door and locking it behind you. They think it's about turning off your emotions, walking away without care, without thought. But real detachment isn't cold, it's clear. It's not anger, it's not bitterness, it's not revenge. It's peace, finally understood. It's when you stop needing to force connection, when you stop handing over your energy just to be seen. You don't need to vanish with drama. You don't need to make announcements or give ultimatums. You just reduce your presence slowly, quietly, until it becomes sacred, until your absence carries more weight than your presence ever did. There's a moment when you realize that not every message deserves a reply. Not every shift in tone needs to be explained. Not every silence must be filled with reassurance. You begin to choose when and how you engage, not to manipulate, but to protect. Because peace, as the Stoics taught, doesn't come from what you gain, it comes from what you learn to live without. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. You don't need more reactions. You don't need applause. You need alignment. When you stop needing a reply, you're not giving up. You're giving space. When you stop needing them to react, you're not withdrawing. You're finally resting. And when you stop needing to be understood, something surprising happens. You become understood, not through arguments or justifications, but through the clarity of your absence. The stillness speaks louder than any defense ever could. People feel it in your lack of reaction, in the timing of your silence, in the calm way you no longer rush to fix what isn't yours to hold. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Detachment leads you inward, where the real healing begins. It isn't about them anymore. It's about you, about understanding the part of you that once thought your value was proven by how much you could endure, about letting go of the version of yourself that believed love had to be earned through overextension and self-sacrifice. You begin to see that being present doesn't mean being available for disrespect, that love is not real if it demands you lose your peace to keep it alive. As you detach, the need for validation begins to fade. You no longer crave closure from those who built their comfort on your confusion. You no longer try to prove your side to those who decided they didn't want to see it in the first place. The silence becomes less about them and more about you reclaiming yourself, your rhythm, your emotional clarity, your ability to breathe without waiting for permission. Seneca once said, "He suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary." Detachment teaches you to stop suffering twice, once from the disappointment others bring, and again from the story you write around it. You start to see things as they are, not as you hoped they'd be. You no longer romanticize red flags. You no longer mistake inconsistency for mystery. And you no longer stay in situations that rob you of clarity. You see reality, not in anger, but in acceptance. And that kind of clarity is rare. You become unbothered, not because you don't feel, but because you've stopped handing out access to every feeling you have. You know when to speak and when to stay quiet. You know when to lean in and when to step back. You no longer reach to be chosen. You choose. And the peace that comes with that, it's undeniable. You carry yourself differently. You walk into rooms without explaining your presence. You engage without trying to be liked. You listen more and speak less, not because you're silenced, but because your words now carry weight. When others begin to notice your shift, they'll call it distance. They'll say you've changed. And they're right. You've stopped being emotionally accessible to people who never earned your closeness. You've stopped oversharing in hopes of connection. You've stopped betraying your boundaries to keep the peace. That version of you that needed constant reassurance, that version has gone quiet. And in its place stands something far stronger: discernment. You're not cold, you're clear. There is no resentment, only realignment. You're not punishing them with your silence. You're respecting yourself with it. You're not shutting them out. You're simply no longer leaving the door wide open. And if they don't know how to handle that, it only reveals how much they relied on your openness without ever offering their own. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." Detachment is the practice of getting to know yourself again, without the noise of everyone else's expectations, without bending to their mood swings, without confusing their inconsistency with your inadequacy. You come back to your center, and from there, life becomes simpler, clearer, quieter. You stop chasing peace from people who thrive on chaos. You stop asking for love from people who only know how to take. You stop waiting for clarity from those who are addicted to confusion. And in that stillness, in that reduction of noise, you become something that cannot be replaced, an unbothered presence. And that's the kind of presence people remember, not because it was loud, but because once it was gone, everything felt different. There's a reason silence lingers longer than words. When something ends cleanly, we grieve, we process, and we move on. But when something ends without explanation, when it just fades, vanishes, slips into stillness, we don't move on. We loop. We turn it over in our minds again and again, searching for meaning. That's not weakness, it's psychology. The mind is built to close loops, to seek completion. And when it doesn't get that, it spirals. That's why someone saying, "I'm done," can feel less painful than someone disappearing without a word. Closure brings peace, but the absence of closure, that brings obsession. You start to analyze everything. The last text, the last glance, the last time their tone changed. You look for hints you missed, clues you ignored. You rewrite the entire story trying to find the part where it fell apart. And the more you try to solve it, the more it dissolves into fragments. That's what makes it so hard. Because it's not just about them, it's about the unanswered questions they leave behind. Carl Jung once said, "Man cannot stand a meaningless life." And in the absence of closure, the mind begins crafting meaning, even if it's imagined, even if it's painful. This is what psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect. The brain's tendency to fixate more intensely on incomplete experiences than on completed ones. Your brain doesn't do this on purpose. It's not trying to torture you. It's just trying to understand. And understanding feels impossible when the story has no ending. You're not obsessing because you're broken. You're obsessing because the narrative was. And somewhere in your psyche there's a version of you still waiting for an answer that's never coming. But here's where something powerful happens. The same force that makes the mind loop can also be redirected, because obsession is just energy without direction. And if you can't close the loop with them, you can begin closing it with yourself. That doesn't mean pretending it didn't matter. It means giving yourself the closure they never offered. It means saying, "I didn't walk away because I stopped caring. I walked away because I started caring about myself." That one sentence can be the start of a new chapter, one that doesn't require them to turn the page. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth." But what do you do when someone leaves without showing you anything at all? When they don't correct, don't confront, don't explain. You learn to find truth in the silence. You learn to see their absence not as an attack, but as a message. And often that message is clearer than any words they could have spoken. They weren't willing to do the work of ending things properly. And that says more about their capacity than about your worth. Because the thing that keeps people stuck the longest is the belief that it could have ended differently. That if they just said one more thing, did one more thing, waited one more day, maybe the story would have turned out another way. But when you look closely, you see the pattern. You see how much effort you put into keeping it alive. You see how much they pulled away before the silence ever arrived. And suddenly, the loop begins to weaken. Not because it's solved, but because you stop blaming yourself for not solving it. Seneca once wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere," and the same is true for your energy. If you keep scattering it across unsolved stories, you never fully arrive in your own life. You keep one foot in the past, hoping for a version of closure that's never coming, and in doing so, you rob yourself of peace in the present. But when you finally say, "I don't need their words to heal," something shifts. The echo becomes quieter, the obsession loses weight, and you start writing from a new place, one rooted in your own clarity, not their confusion. This doesn't mean the loop disappears overnight. The mind may still wander. You may still feel it, a pull, a curiosity, a hollow space that once held potential. But now you recognize it for what it is, not unfinished love, but unfinished explanation. And you stop waiting for someone else to complete it. You close the loop by realizing you don't need their permission to stop thinking about them. The hardest truth to accept is that some people leave not because the connection wasn't real, but because the responsibility it required was too much. And so they vanish, they avoid the conversation, they choose the clean escape over the difficult honesty. And that silence, it echoes, but not forever. Eventually, it becomes a distant hum, reminding you not of loss, but of growth. Because the moment you stopped seeking answers from them, you started listening to yourself. So when they come back, and sometimes they do, don't be surprised, not because they finally found the right words, but because they felt the weight of the story you left unfinished. The difference now, you no longer need to hear it, because you've already turned the page, and that is the most powerful kind of closure, the kind you give yourself when no one else was brave enough to offer it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away, not with anger, not with noise, but with peace so complete it becomes unforgettable. Because when you stop chasing clarity from others, you create it within yourself. And that kind of clarity doesn't beg to be understood, it simply moves forward, untouched, unshaken. If this message spoke to something deep within you, there's more waiting. Watch the next video on your screen. It might be the reminder your mind has been waiting for. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal. Stay grounded, stay clear, and never forget, your stillness is your strength.